Welcome all, and thank you for joining today's AWRI webinar. My name is Robin Dixon. I'm a senior viticulturist with the AWRI. I'm joining you today from Ghana country, and in the spirit of reconciliation, the AWRI acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. I would also like to acknowledge Wine Australia for providing funding and support for webinars via the AWRI Extension Project. In this session, we have an update on Sustainable Winegrowing Australia. So while we give some more people a chance to join on, we've got about 200 people registered today. I've just got a few reminders for you. If you want to ask a question throughout the session, just have a look at the toolbar at the bottom of your screen and click on the Q&A button and type in your question at any time. So we have Rachel Triggs up first, but Rachel has to leave shortly after her presentation. So if you do have any questions for Rachel, please make sure that you ask the questions during her presentation so we can ask her the questions before she leaves. Also, as always, these webinars are recorded and they will be, a link to the recording will be sent to all participants after the session. So for anyone who's just joined, welcome. Today's webinar topic is an update on Sustainable Winegrowing Australia. It's a great pleasure to welcome Rachel Triggs from Wine Australia. We have Anna Hooper from Australian Grape and Wine and Dr. Marty Longbottom from the AWRI. But first up, as I mentioned, I'd like to introduce Rachel Triggs. So Rachel, having previously held several roles with Wine Australia, including General Counsel, Rachel is responsible for Wine Australia's strategy development, including the development and execution of an ESG, so environmental, social and governance and sustainability strategy for the Australian grape and wine sector. Rachel also manages Wine Australia's legal, regulatory and market access functions, including the administration of the export controls and the label integrity program. She has many degrees. So before joining Wine Australia, she was a corporate lawyer specializing in wine law. She has a law degree, a Bachelor of Science, and various other degrees. If you want to know more about Rachel, jump online and have a look at her bio. It's quite extensive. Over to you, Rachel, if you're ready.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much to AWRI for hosting this morning. I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes just walking you through a couple of things to do with Sustainable Winegrowing Australia. First of all, I want to really talk about the regulatory environment and how it is impacting upon the ESG and sustainability framework globally. I'm then going to turn to look at how retailers' buying decisions are being influenced by that regulatory environment. And after that, I'm going to run through some of the initiatives that Wine Australia has employed in recent times around marketing and Sustainable Winegrowing Australia. So emerging drivers of ESG, this really is a rocket ship, this area. I honestly believe that this is the biggest opportunity, but also the biggest challenge that the Australian grape and wine industry will face this decade. It is becoming fast a reality that it's not whether you get on the bus, or if you want to get on the bus, it's if you don't get on this bus, you eventually will not be able to play in some of these overseas markets. Now, on the screen there that you can see there are several regulatory sort of initiatives at play across the global landscape. And these are by no means, this is by no means an exhaustive list. So very much focused on the UK and the EU for the purposes of this sort of presentation. And that is because they really are paving the way in this area. So just by way of example, I suppose, in the UK since Brexit, so since the UK has left the European Union, they've brought in this Environmental Act, so the Environmental Act of 2021, and it places a legal obligation on the UK government to set long-term binding environmental targets relating to air quality, water, biodiversity, resource efficiency and waste reduction. And those targets must be presented to Parliament no later than the 31st of October this year, and they must set goals with a duration of no less than 15 years. When these goals are set and publicised, they will be binding on the UK government. And the UK government also recently has introduced new tax applicable to plastic packaging, anything that does not contain at least 30% of recycled plastic. So that's just one example of where this ESG regulatory space is really moving at pace. And we are going to see some significant changes in the coming times. In the EU, we've seen the EU Green Deal. So one of those being the carbon border adjustments scheme. So the mechanism that will put a carbon price on certain products imported into the EU. It'll work in concert with the EU's emission trading scheme to ensure European climate action results not just in global emission, or results in global emissions decline rather than just pushing the emissions to a different country. So by that phenomenon known as carbon leakage. At this stage, the mechanism only applies to iron, steel, cements, fertilizers, aluminium and electricity. But the European Commission is going to review that in 2026 and decide whether it should be extended to other areas, including to agricultural products. We then turn to things like the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures and Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. So the ASX draws on the recommendations of the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And while it's not mandatory in Australia, APRA and ASIC have both cited the TCFD recommendations as being best practice for climate-related financial disclosures. So that it is this increasing acknowledgement across the globe that financial risks and opportunities related to climate change contribute to a company's risk profile. And as a result, companies and investors are increasingly seeking to understand such risks and to contemplate them in making investment and lending decisions. The ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board, so international investors with global investment portfolios are increasingly calling for high quality, transparent, reliable and comparable reporting by companies on climate and other environmental, social and governance matters. And on the 3rd of November last year, the trustee of the International Financial Reporting Standards announced the creation of this new standard setting board, so the ISSB, to help meet that demand. So the intention is that the ISSB will deliver a comprehensive global baseline of sustainability related disclosure standards that will provide investors and other capital market participants with information about a company's sustainability related risks and opportunities to help them to make informed decisions. And last there, the Race to Zero is the UN-backed global campaign rallying non-state actors, so including companies, cities, regions, financial, educational and healthcare institutions to take immediate action to reduce emissions and deliver fairer zero carbon world in time. So this is happening. This is happening now. And this idea that that the sustainability category within the Australian grape and wine sector is being led by consumers is to some part true, but there are far bigger matters at play here. We then move to the impact that regulatory environment is having on the buying decision of retailers. And I've just commissioned a piece of work looking at 3 big retailers across the UK and the EU, so Sainsbury's, Systembolaget and Albert Heijn, to look at what they're demanding as far as social, environmental and climate and packaging. And yes, in some ways, this push towards sustainable products is being led by consumers. I just cannot stress enough how much of this global regulatory space is actually driving change in this area. So Albert Heijn, for example, on the environmental side, all suppliers, producers and factories must be compliant with an acceptable certification standard by the end of this year. and their parent company and brands will need to be net zero carbon emissions across all operations by 2040. That's scope 1 and scope 2, and net zero across all supply chains, products and services by 2050. So that's scope 3. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but the landscape for Australian wine exporters in markets like the EU and UK is going to change significantly, because the buying decisions of these retailers are changing significantly. They all have their own strategies as far as reducing carbon emissions, and not just environmental, but also across social and ethical behaviour. And being part of a system like Sustainable Winegrowing Australia, and we have to get the system right. We need to make sure that it evolves to meet these demands of the retailers. It really is going to be paramount to the success of the Australian wine industry going forward. I mentioned around social and ethical sustainability. They are just as important as the environmental side. Being able to demonstrate that you've got social governance in place in your business is really, really important. And there are some retailers that are even looking to making buying decisions based on gender diversity, inclusivity policies, employment standards, particularly for young workers, being able to prove that you've got best practice human rights policies in place across the entire supply chain. So this is a tsunami that is coming. I'm going to shift now to talk about some of our marketing initiatives. So there's increasing research and evidence across the globe about the rise of the ethical consumer. And whilst there's no strong evidence they're willing to pay more just yet, sustainable and environmental claims are definitely playing more of a role in influencing their purchasing decisions. So a recent study by Bain and Company across the APAC region uncovered that Asia Pacific markets care about the environment just as much as Western markets. So this is not just something that's happening in Western markets, and they care more about health-related ESG matters as well. According to Wine Intelligence, in core wine markets globally, more than half of regular wine drinkers are motivated by sustainability, and these customers are much more likely to be millennials and in that much higher income bracket, and they're more likely to be engaged in alternative wines. And I'll explain in the next slide what I mean by alternative slides. So this alternative wines is what used to be termed by Wine Intelligence as SOLA, so sustainable, organic and NOLO. This is the first year where they've run a survey that's actually looking at these categories that you can see on the screen of alternative wines, and specifically they've asked around natural. So surprisingly to me, natural there has come out on top, and sustainably produced wine has come out third there. So a really strong indication that consumers are looking to products that are more sustainable. With the market access and consumer context in mind, it's been really great to see this Sustainable Winegrowing Australia programs made real traction in the last financial year. So it's almost doubled its membership numbers overall, and those that became certified both in vineyard and winery more than doubled. So there's real groundswell in this space, but we do need more. And Marty will talk about this later in the session, but it's very encouraging for us to see so many producers voluntarily participating, and many regions proactively taking a lead to bring the local communities together and start participating in the program. This year we released the first impact report, so it highlights the results across these 6 key areas. The report breaks down the results for vineyards and wineries. The takeaway message here is that it is an inaugural release presenting a national data set that we'll be able to use to benchmark our performance against in future years. And it includes several member stories to articulate just how they're practicing sustainability in their businesses, vineyards or wineries. It's been greatly received by the member community, but also the trade and media, which has been really pleasing to see. So helping to generate many positive media stories about Australian wine and sustainability more generally here in Australia, and also overseas in markets such as the UK, the US and Germany. We'll start working on the next report a little bit later this year, and it's due to be released in February 2023. And you can find that report on the Sustainable Winegrowing website and download it. The other key initiative's been Qantas launching their Green Tier Sustainability Program for the frequent flyer members. So this is really exciting because it's our first retail partnership They wanted to promote sustainable wine, but they didn't know how to categorise sustainable wine. And that's when they came to Sustainable Winegrowing Australia, looking for validation that certain producers were operating sustainably. So very similar to what we're going to see in the retailer space, where they're looking for a certification that verifies sustainability claims. They've called the program Sustainable SIPs, and it demonstrates how important those sustainability claims are and how important it is to be able to substantiate them. So it's not enough anymore just to say that you're sustainable without actually being able to back it up. You need to get on the pathway if you're thinking about going down this sustainable path, and I think everyone should be, and it's okay to start somewhere. So I think what's really important here is that it's not about being best on ground, it's about being the most improved. So even if you're sort of at the bottom at the moment, the fact that you're willing to make changes and to demonstrate that you've increased your practices or you've improved your practices over time is really great. It's about continuous improvement. It's not about airing your dirty laundry. In lots of ways, it's better to start at the bottom of the curve. It's about measuring and monitoring, and you can compare the national data set. And critical mass really is key. If we're going to be able to demonstrate Australia's sustainability credentials overseas, we need real groundswell in this area. This is a demonstration of how Wine Australia is incorporating Sustainable Winegrowing Australia into its marketing messaging. So next month, in fact, through Australian Wine Connect, our global trade platform, we're running the 3rd edition of this Future of Drinking, which will focus on climate mitigation and adaptation practices, being led by several really forward-thinking producers, all certified under Sustainable Winegrowing Australia. And Dr. Sharon Harvey from our research team at Wine Australia will discuss the climate atlas that's been developed and the emissions roadmap that we're currently working on. If you are a producer and you've got an interest in joining the program, it really is a perfect time of year because membership is on a financial year basis. You can visit the website, look at the Become a Member area to get started. Thanks for your time today, and I'm now handing you over to Anna Hooper from Australian Grape and Wine.
Thank you, Rachel. And as Rachel mentioned, we are now moving on to Anna Hooper. So thank you, Anna, for joining us. Anna joined the national peak body for the wine sector, Australian Grape and Wine, after a long career as a grower and producer of wine in Australia and overseas. Her enduring interest in sustainability has seen her receive several awards, including the South Australian Rural Women's Award in 2013. She has been a director on a number of private and government boards relating to wine and natural resource management, including Australian Vignerons, where she later became CEO. Anna now advocates for continual improvement in both economic and environmental policy and assists the sector in strategies that improve resilience and preparedness for threats. So if you're ready, Anna, I'll invite you to start sharing.
Thanks, Robin. Thanks for the introduction. We just heard a little bit about how the market is changing when it comes to sustainability. My presentation's about the sustainability environment from a policy perspective and what we need to do, and the keys to remaining prosperous as times change and everything gets a little bit more demanding. So I'll highlight some of the key issues and risks in the social, economic and political environments, including geopolitical factors impacting trade. The growing momentum around sustainability is hard to ignore. Increasingly, companies who don't consider sustainability are coming under fire from all directions. And in response to this greater scrutiny, many larger businesses are now voluntarily putting out public reports about how they are tracking. Environmental social governance, or ESG criteria, are helping to better define sustainability. So we no longer lack consensus on what it means to be sustainable. and it's extending beyond environmental indicators, as Rachel said. So it used to be about, whereas it used to be about energy and water and waste, it's now also about other aspects of sustainability, such as workers' rights, fair wages, and in the case of alcoholic beverages industries, it's about prevention of harmful drinking as well. And it's about how we manage this and hold ourselves to account, i.e. G in ESG. And it's more than just marketing now. So I'm going to talk in three parts. Firstly, a little bit about how we fare as Australians and as wine producers when it comes to sustainability, and then some of the domestic and export related policy issues that are driving changed requirements of businesses. I'm going to focus on the EU because they tend to be the most stringent, and they're a really good indicator of what's coming from elsewhere in the world and at home. So hopefully I'll leave you with a better understanding of what's at risk for your business in light of these changes. So let's first very briefly consider the reputation of Brown Australia, because this has an impact on how the rest of the world views all of our produce. Before I go there, I'll just mention quickly, as you know, we've recently got a new government, and the influence of the Greens and the Teals, with the influence of the Greens and the Teals, we're likely to see a much greater emphasis on protecting the environment. For instance, hot off the press last week is the Albanese government's climate change legislation for 43% emissions reductions by 2030 passed through the lower house. The Labor government has also stated that they will take a much more active steps to drive things like waste reduction, to increase recycling, and by picking up the National Waste Policy Action Plan and its various targets, we're likely to see much greater emphasis on how we deal with waste. We also saw good support from the previous government when it comes to the ag sector. They put out various packages aimed at assisting agricultural industries be part of the solution by seeking to place value on nature and on sustainable farming or natural capital. So Australia may be in slightly better shape geopolitically than we were a while ago, several years ago, but as far as Western countries go, we weren't really coming off the greatest baseline. We're a little slow to move on our climate change commitments. And our relative inaction on climate change to date has not really put us in a green spotlight overseas. The world didn't look too favourably on the pictures of dead animals that hit world news after the bushfires, and believers in karma might have linked this to our inaction on climate change at the time. And in terms of how we rate ourselves, a recent report on the state of the environment has said that the state and trends of the environment in Australia is poor and deteriorating as a result of increasing pressures from climate change, habitat loss, invasive species, pollution, and resource extraction. In fact, our rate of species decline is particularly bad amongst OECD nations. It's the worst, in fact. And overall, we don't do too badly in terms of there's various global reports that come out. This is one of a number of them, and they're designed to help countries benchmark themselves. And I'm sure that Rachel mentioned, but you've probably already heard of the Sustainable Development Goals. This is the Sustainable Development Report, and it's put out by Cambridge University. It profiles countries against each of the 17 goals. Australia rates 38th overall out of 163, but there are significant challenges remaining in many areas, hence the red and orange squares that you can see in the colour scheme. And the red squares in particular are the areas of the most significant challenges, and they happen to relate to areas quite relevant to wine, climate action, responsible consumption and production, and life on the land. So that's Australia, but what about wine as a product? Well, that's a slightly different story. It actually rates quite well. I thought this was really interesting. For those who weren't at the Wine Industry Technical Conference in Adelaide a couple of weeks ago, we heard from Luli Housestead from Wine Intelligence that wine is seen by consumers as natural. All wine is seen as natural, not just the kind made by hipsters. And it comes from fruit, so of course it is. It's been around for thousands of years. predates the Industrial Revolution. You can kind of see why people think that. They also think that single-use glass packaging is sustainable, much more so than plastic bottles. The impact of weight and emissions is obviously not on people's radars, and I guess why would it be? So while this sounds positive, this perception of wine, we also need to work hard to protect a reputation that may not always be well-founded and is prone to being unravelled. Furthermore, wine intelligence data from July 2021 suggests that there's also a trend for favouring local wines over imported wines. And in some markets, this has strengthened over the last few years. This is a risk for Australia, as 44% of our wines are exported, and 4 out of 5 of our top 5 markets by volume are to nations who also produce their own local wine. So we also need to worry about the transport issue and getting wine to market, which incidentally has also been recently reported to be an even more significant part of the emissions source of food products than we previously thought. Talking about food miles, let's go to Europe for a while. They've recently put out their controversial farm to fork strategy in 2020, and it contains all sorts of bold statements and sentiments such as about sustainability, such as a pledge to reduce the overall use and risk of chemical pesticides by 50% by 2030. And many ag industry groups over there, and as well as advocates for food security, realise the challenges that they face in achieving that and are not particularly supportive. The strategy has various other goals tied to raising awareness, such as potentially bringing out mandatory labelling relating to food nutrition, but also potentially relating to sustainability. And in 2021, the European Commission presented its Fit for 55 package, which is a climate and energy policy framework for reducing net greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030, compared to 1990 levels, towards their net zero 2050 target. You're probably asking, why do we care about what's happening over there? Well, it's because when our trading nations put in place environmental policies that cost their producers more, they tend to be pressured by those very producers to ensure that their industries don't become less competitive than their trading nations as a result. So they level the playing field. And an example of that Rachel also mentioned was the agreement by the EU Council in March 2022 about the carbon border adjustment mechanism. So if countries are yet to establish a carbon pricing, then their exports to the EU will be penalised. And whilst it's at this stage only high emissions products, as Rachel said, in 2026 it will be reviewed and potentially might be extended to other products such as wine. We also recently saw France come out with a draft document requiring that producers using a certain proportion of reusable packaging with incremental increases up to 10% of their total use by 2027. So reusable, not recyclable packaging. So what this means for a product like wine and for imported wine is not clear. On another note, but with a similar theme of greener trade ambitions in the EU, we've recently seen the EU seal a deal with the New Zealanders, which contains a never before seen section dedicated to sustainable food systems. The European Commission in Brussels has indicated that sustainability chapters will be part of future trade deals with other nations more and more in future. The New Zealand deal covers a list of about 10 different things, and this isn't all of them, but just to summarise, it covers food production methods and practices, efficient use of natural resources and agricultural inputs, including chemical pesticides and fertilisers, greenhouse gas emissions, sustainable food processing, healthy, sustainable and nutritious diets, food loss and waste, and also has a section on Indigenous knowledge and participation in food systems. I've mentioned before, and so did Rachel, there's a trend towards corporate companies feeling pressure to report their ESG credentials. And I'll just go through this quickly, but in particular, climate-related risk information is being sought by investors, lenders and insurance underwriters, essentially so that they can factor in risk into their decision making. So the Financial Stability Board reports into to the G20 has created the Task Force on Climate-related Financial Disclosures, as Rachel mentioned, and 8 jurisdictions, including UK, Japan, Singapore and the EU, have now mandated the incorporation of these types of disclosures into their national reporting regimes. It's likely that Australia will follow suit in the next couple of years by making climate change reporting mandatory for public companies by 2024. And there's also, more recently, the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures, which is bringing in nature-related risks in much the same way. So this is more aimed at large businesses. What does it mean for small businesses, you might ask? It's difficult to say, but one would think that as this information becomes more readily available to the public, it's likely to generate a growing interest from everyone, regardless of business size. And with this demand for more information, we've also seen the consumer watchdog, the ACCC, in 2022-23, announce their priorities for compliance and enforcement. And one of these things that they're going to be cracking down on is environmental claims and sustainability. So you need to report, but you can't make it up. And because of this new age of ESG responsibilities, I suspect that some businesses are at risk of falling behind a bit, and that being able to report ESG credentials truthfully and verifiably to some extent may be required to grant permission to play in the market. To what extent smaller businesses will have to be expected to follow suit is hard to say. And if you think about it, traditionally small businesses have always had a good inherent trust by consumers for things like sustainability and good business practices, but it's not always well founded. And I think it would be fair to have some concerns that small businesses will also have to work a little harder in future to maintain this positive reputation that they've always had. And that's where sustainability programs like Sustainable Winegrowing Australia will play a really important role for those businesses. Traditionally, there's been a bit of a lack of understanding of sustainability, and I think it's held it back a little bit. But with the rapid development of a more consistent frameworks across sectors, I think that that's set to change. And consumers are going to start to understand and trust sustainability a lot more in much the same way that they did with organics. And with that trust will come greater demand. So the future, I think with a greener government, there'll be more and more opportunities for the sector relating to government incentives to become more sustainable, but there'll also be disincentives relating to climate change, waste, and anything linked to damaging the environment. So we'll see more problems for those that rest on their laurels, and especially when it comes to trade with other countries. An increase in ESG reporting, we'll see an increase in ESG reporting, and I think this is likely to be mandatory, at least for public companies, by 2024. And with that will come the assignment of risk relating to ESG or poor ESG being embedded in the cost of finance and insurance. There'll be a potential loss of social licence for businesses who are laggards, and we'll see a greater urgency for sustainability certification, at the very least for corporations wanting to put some rigour behind their ESG reporting, and maybe even for addressing the increasing demand for public statements relating to emissions. And this will apply equally to large corporates who are looking for substance or third-party verification behind their sustainability pledges or their ESG reporting that's important to their investors and their markets. But we'll also see it being increasingly important for small businesses whose product may not be acceptable to the market if they can't provide evidence of their social licence to operate. So thanks for joining us today. And just to sum up, I really want to stress that Sustainable Winegrowing Australia has a huge opportunity to be a really important contributor to protecting individual businesses from reputational risk, at the same time as building the profile of Australian wine globally, which will be for everyone's benefit. We do need to get better, and we need to keep improving, because this is a new type of green revolution that we're in right now. The sustainability environment is rapidly evolving all the time, and it's likely to continue to do so for quite some time. I expect to be speaking to the converted in this room. So my last message is to ask that those of us who are leaders and who are here today do what they can to encourage others along with us on the sustainability journey.
Thank you, Anna, for your presentation. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Marty Longbottom. Marty began her career in the wine industry, helping to establish her family's vineyard in Pathway, South Australia in the early 1990s. She holds undergraduate and postgraduate qualifications in viticulture from the University of Adelaide and has extensive technical and vineyard management experience in both Australia and the US. For the past 10 years, Marty has focused on research and extension of wine industry sustainability projects, including regional climate risk analysis, benchmarking greenhouse gas emissions from vineyards, and the management of corporate water assets. She manages the Australian wine industry's sustainability program, Sustainable Winegrowing Australia. If you're ready, Marty, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Robin, and thanks for joining us today, everybody. It's really great to be back here again to do the next update on Sustainable Winegrowing Australia. So where I wanted to start was, you've heard this already this morning, but just to talk about the membership. Our membership has increased significantly in the last 2 years. Rachel mentioned that 48% growth that happened over the last 2 years, and you can see up in the top left-hand corner of my slide there, this is what the membership numbers have looked like over those last couple of years. So we have got more than 900 members in the program. Those members are across 49 regions, and they cover roughly around about 40% of our vineyard area and roughly about 40% of the national crush last year. Now, of those members, around about a quarter of them have been through the certification process and are certified members of the program. Now, we can talk about numbers all we want, but the people behind these numbers look a lot like this group from Rutherglen. Members are motivated to join the program by different drivers, and you heard already from Rachel and Anna about what those drivers are. Ultimately, though, what the people on the ground are telling us is that being sustainable, going through this program and becoming certified, it's just the right thing to do. And they also tell us that there's really a commercial imperative for them to do it. Fundamentally, it's about protecting and building their businesses and the environment that supports them for future generations. So this group here from Rutherglen, they worked with us, well, they've been working with us for the last couple of years, and they've been using the Sustainable Winegrowing Australia framework to set a sustainability vision for their region. And they're also all working individually at identifying and working on their own sustainability goals. So a lot of what we've been able to do in the regions in the last 2 years that's really reflected in that membership has been due to the support we've had from the regions, the regional associations across Australia, their relationships with their local government through federal grant schemes, and with the support of the large wine companies. And I really want to give them a big shout out now and acknowledge that enormous amount of support we've had across Australia. We've also worked with a team in Tasmania. So we travelled to Tasmania earlier in the year. You can see Robin there standing at the front of the crowd. We had about 30 people come along to that workshop. And this was made possible because we've made a new collaboration relationship with Landcare Tasmania down there. And it was really nice to see quite a different group of people come out that day, and they were really excited to see what the program could do for Tasmania. They looked through their statewide data, and they were able to go away having some insight into that and some ideas about where their focus should be. And yeah, we're really looking forward to going back there next year and working with them again. We've also been working with a group in the Yarra Valley in the last couple of years, helping them to join the program, helping them to identify areas for their on-ground improvements individually and also as a region. Now, we were lucky enough to meet this group face-to-face for the first time last month, and it was really a really nice celebration of their individual and collective dedication. And we're continuing to work with these guys one-on-one. We're doing it a lot remotely still, but we're helping them to bring sustainability to life in their everyday operations and for them as a region. And my last group photo, the most recent one, was taken when we were in Western Australia 2 weeks ago. And again, we were working with another 30 growers over 2 days and helping them, really enforce their commitment to sustainability. Now, this project has been supported on the ground by Ellie Jarvis, who you can see in the middle of the photograph there. And they've had the financial support from their local shire, from the Margaret River Wine Association, from the AWRI, and also through the National Landcare Program. So if that's got you wondering a bit more about the program itself, if you're not as familiar with the program and you are interested in the program, it is a completely voluntary program and it's open to any vineyards, wineries or wine businesses in Australia. So wine businesses, this is an update to the program that happened last year. What we call wine businesses are, they're like a virtual winery. So this is for people who are producing wine, they've got a wine label, but they don't necessarily have a vineyard or winery. You can also now join the program and we do encourage you to do that. What happens as part of the membership? So anyone in those categories can join as a member, and you can do that at any time of year, but right at the moment is a very good time of year because our members are all renewing, and it means that any of the data that they report to us will get included in those national reports, like the impact report that Rachel showed you. So to be a member, basically you need to go through and you submit a data set to us, you go through a self-assessment workbook and you make a payment of $110. So that's the members, and it's a pretty small commitment. The ones who take on the bigger commitment are those going through the certification. So the certified members go through the same process of going through the data and workbook, and they pay the same amount of money. But the other thing that they commit to do is they do a one-off training, and they also go through an independent audit. Now I'll come back to the certified members in a minute. I just want to focus on the members for a second. So I mentioned the data and workbook. This is very much the same as what it's looked like in the last couple of years, but I did want to just point out a couple of things. It does go beyond the environment. So you can see a couple of little asterisks there just to demonstrate this addresses profitability, it addresses your economic performance, and it addresses social issues and the community as well. And the other important feature is because we're collecting information about energy use, so electricity and fuel, and also fertilizers, we're also enabling all members to account for their Scope 1 and Scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions. Now the workbook, many of you will be very, very familiar with it, but just a reminder for people, it's set out in a way, there's a number of questions that every member works through every year, but the way that it's set out is if you work through these questions, you work down the list as the numbers increase, and it's set out so that you can demonstrate where you've gone beyond knowledge, you've taken some action and gotten to best practice. So across the board, consistently at level 3 is where you've achieved best practice. And for those who are certified, this is aligned with the certification standards as well. So if you can reach that level 3, you're also probably ready to become certified. Now, the enhancements that we've made to this year, to let you know if you haven't come across them yet already, but for every one of those questions, you can go in there now and store some of your own comments. So if when you're working through these workbooks, you find there's something that you want to remind yourself and come back to later, you can make those comments. They'll be saved in there. Even if you don't come back to them for another year, they will be there next year when you come back to remind yourself the things that you were thinking about, the areas that you were thinking about improving in that next year. The other thing you can do, and this one's particularly useful for people getting prepared for certification, if you're starting to get your documentation in place, and as you're going through the workbook, where in those relevant areas, if you've got a document that you're filling out and think, yeah, I'll be able to use that in my audit, you can also now upload those directly into the workbook. So it's now become a bit of a repository for all of your record keeping and your information. Now, this is not compulsory, but for those who are just starting out with this and working towards certification, it's a really good tool to get you going and keep all those documents in one place. And for those of you who are using it already, who are certified, it becomes more useful as an internal auditing tool for you. So moving on from the members and just spending a few minutes to talk about the certified members, I mentioned before, the only difference with the certified members is that they do go through a training process, getting them ready for audit, and they have an actual audit done. So the certification training, it's a one-off requirement for everyone who's going through certification. Now, if you've been through this training before, if you went through it 5 or 6 years ago, you don't have to do it again. It is just a one-off activity that you need to do. What we do in these training courses, it takes a day. We can do them online, we can do them face-to-face. There's lots of different options, but essentially we take you through the entire standard and we talk about practical ways that you can implement the standard in your businesses. The whole idea of this is not to create extra work for people. It's not to create lots of paperwork. It's just to work with the systems that you've got, making sure you can identify the ones you've got that are working for you and that are compliant with the standard. And for those people who are starting from scratch, we can give you all the templates and all the resources to help you get to that level you need to be to become certified. The other nice thing about this is we do work in groups mostly, and those groups, they're often groups that are in regions, so we can go out to a region. We're talking to your peers, and you get the ability to talk to other people in your region about this as well. So it's a really good environment to do this in, or even if you're doing it online, it's for some people might be the first time you've spoken to people in other regions around Australia, and that's also a really, really positive experience. And it's not just limited to one day. So we'll do a one-day training workshop with you, but there's always follow-up support. We run lots of online follow-up sessions that everyone's welcome to attend after they've done that training. You can ask us any questions you like when you're getting prepared for audit. Now, we get a lot of feedback from people about these workshops. We ask people to give us feedback. It's just as part of our continuous improvement. And what people tell us is when they give an overall workshop rating, on average, they're rating us at 97%. So this is, I guess, how good these workshops really are. When we ask them to rate the usefulness to their business of these workshops, people tell their average rating is 98%. And at least, or around about 50% of people have said after going through this, they know that they're going to change at least one practice. But then more than that, 65% are saying that they go away thinking about reassessing what they're currently doing in their businesses. They go out and they're going to get extra information, or they're going to discuss what they heard and what they learnt during that day with their peers. And maybe as important as anything, no one ever tells us that they're not going to change anything in their business. So these are really fundamental. It really drives people to think differently about what they're doing. Perhaps the most important thing that happens during these workshops is that 99% of people who go through these workshops increase their confidence about going to audit. So if you're feeling at all worried or fearful of this process, don't, because you'll come out feeling much better about it. This is just really to show you the different regions that we've covered in this is just the last 12 months. We've seen a lot of different people, a lot of different regions. We've heard so many really, really positive stories across these regions. We've heard some negative ones too, but I think that's really good. It creates a good mix. We've got a good diversity of people that we've been talking to. So we have a good idea of what's happening on the ground. And I may have mentioned, we have taken around about 700 people through that certification process in the last year. And already this financial year, we're up at around 70 people going through this. So there's a huge commitment and a really big groundswell of people looking to go through that certification process. If you're interested in being one of these people that goes through and getting prepared for certification, and you can do it with the AWRI, we provide those workshops. There are other providers out there who do it. If you want to do one with the AWRI, you can go to the Sustainable Winegrowing Australia website and click on the link that says expression of interest for one of these. Give us your details so that we can then get in touch with you when there's something happening in your region, or just let you know when there's an online session happening. Now, just a little bit more detail about certification, because we do get a lot of questions about this. Just to be really clear about it, we have 2 independent sustainability standards that we're working with. Now, these standards are owned and managed by FreshCare. And for those of you who are not familiar with FreshCare, they're an independent organisation. They're a not-for-profit, and their sole reason for being is that they administer standards on behalf of agricultural sectors. So they have other standards for food safety, they have environmental standards, and they have the sustainability standards that they operate on behalf of the wine industry. So we have a really strong connection with FreshCare. We work with them a lot, and our role is that we essentially tell them these are the things we want covered in our standard, and give them the topics, and then they convert it and put it into language that can be audited. So that's their real role there. They manage that part of the process. But the other really fun, I guess, important role that FreshCare has is that they also maintain relationships with the independent certification bodies. And the certification bodies are the ones who can actually go out on the ground and do the audit. So this is just to show you there are 7 different certification bodies who can do these sustainability audits, and you can contact any one of those and ask them to do your audit for you. A couple of key dates for your membership. We are right in the middle of the renewal period now, so July and August, and it's really important that we do get your membership data and workbooks in before the 31st of August. What happens then is that we go through, we have a look at the data, make sure it's pretty correct, and then we'll release the benchmarking reports after that. But your final membership payments are due on the 14th of September, and that'll enable us to give you the benchmarking reports at the end of October. Now, the trust mark's gaining visibility. Hopefully you've seen it around in your regions, wherever you are. Hopefully you've seen it maybe on somebody's website. Maybe you've seen one of these farm gate signs that are getting out there. There's lots and lots of them around in the regions now. So yeah, hopefully you'll start to recognise those. We're also seeing it on more and more wine labels, and we're getting a flurry of people asking us whether they can use it on their wine labels, which is also really exciting. So check them out when you're in the wine shop. This is Hither and Yon. They are a wine business in McLaren Vale, and they recently participated in a sustainability tasting at the Tech Conference. Just a few reminders about the trust mark. So the trust mark is owned by the AWRI and Australian Grape and Wine, and we really do encourage the certified members to use the trust mark. It's really important that you put it out there and it does become, well recognised. However, I just want to state the trust mark is only for the certified members. So if you're a member who's only just started, you won't be able to use the trust mark until you've been through that independent audit process. So certified members only. The other thing is that you are using it under license from us. So you do need to apply to use it. And as much as anything, that's so that we just understand who's using it, making sure they're using it correctly, and we can keep a register of where it is being used so that when we do promotions about the program, we can direct people to you because you are using the trust mark. Now, when you're applying for it, you do apply via the membership platform, and I'll show you just in a sec what you need to do, but it's important that you show us your artwork before you publish it. And for those using it on wine labels, you do need to send through your traceability evidence to us. So for anyone who's been through an audit, you'll get a certificate that looks like this one. And what you need to do is log in into your membership with Sustainable Winegrowing Australia. The first thing you need to do is change your membership type so that you're a certified member. Once you do that, it will open up another section for you where you transfer the information from your Fresh Care certificate over to us. You tell us which standard you used, who your certification body was, your number, when you expire, and the last thing you do is you upload a copy of that certificate so that we can see it and verify it at our end. Once we've done that, you'll become a certified member, and that's how you'll be seen on the website as certified. The other thing that happens is that there'll be a new section open up in your membership with this application to use the trust mark. So if you want to start using it, that's where you go. And when you open that up, you'll see that the rules for use for the trust mark are there, and you can download all of the trust mark files. So that's where you get all of that information. And then the other thing we ask you to do is upload a copy of your artwork if you're using it on labels, or even if you're using it on your website. And if you're using it on your wine labels, this is where you upload your evidence of traceability. Now, the key criteria around the use of trust mark, and this is specific to wine labels, if that trust mark's on a wine label, what it means is that that wine contains fruit from certified vineyards, and that's at least 85% of the fruit. And also that wine has been made in a certified winery or wineries. Okay, that's the, I guess, overarching rule of use on the wine labels. Now, there's a lot of people with the ambition to use the trust mark in vintage 23, and we're getting really excited about that. I guess we just want to remind people, if you're gearing up to use the trust mark in vintage 23, make sure that you are meeting all of the criteria of the rules. Now, it's really important you've got your Sustainable Winegrowing Australia membership. If you don't have your membership, you won't be passing an audit. Make sure your membership payment comes in by the 14th of September. For those people who are not already certified, well, hang on, if you're already certified, you don't have to worry about these dates so much. But if you're not yet certified and you're looking for vintage 23 certification, you must have gone through that training process before the 14th of September. And the reason we ask you to do that is so that you've started putting all those processes in place before the start of the growing season. So make sure you've done your certification training before the 14th of September, and you must have had your audit and a successful audit complete before you harvest those grapes. So they're the critical dates you need to be thinking about. The last thing I want to make a really strong point about is there are a lot of people gearing up to use this trust mark for vintage 23 on their wine labels. So there are a lot of people looking to get audits done before the end of this calendar year, huge demand, and this is placing a lot of pressure on the certification body who are out there doing the audit. So if you're one of those people and you have not yet booked your audit, please get in contact with certification bodies today, book in your audit. Even if you're not ready for it yet, you may still be waiting for another 3 months to get that audit booked in. So just get on the phone or email them today and book it in so that you don't miss out. The Trustmark Rules and Style Guide are available to anybody. They're on the website. You just go to the resources section up there in the top right, and you can get to the Trustmark Rules and Style Guide. If you've got any questions about the use of the Trustmark, that's the place to go to get all those questions answered. Just a final word on sustainability. Sustainability is a really holistic system. It takes into account the triple bottom line of sustainability, incorporating all of those things that we've been talking about. Rachel mentioned it earlier, and so did Anna, around this net zero target that, you know, not just us as an industry has, but many others are heading towards that net zero target. Sustainable Winegrowing Australia collects the Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions from vineyards and wineries. It doesn't go beyond that and collect Scope 3 information at the moment. So for us to get truly to a net zero position, we probably need to be thinking about transport, the emissions from transport and emissions from packaging. The reason I'm highlighting those, we do get a lot of questions about packaging, and I just wanted to reinforce that we do address packaging in the waste section. So certified members of the program are considering the material inputs in their production systems. They're looking at size, quantity, weight, etc. They're also needing to look at their reuse and recycling potential of all the materials that they're using. They look at their residual waste from their production systems, and they're prioritising the reduction of plastic waste. And all of this is captured in a continuous improvement program for waste management. So that's how we've currently been doing it. But what we are doing in the next 12 months is looking specifically at packaging and incorporating it as a standalone part of the program. So you can expect next year when you come back in, there's likely to be some metrics around packaging and also some areas in the workbook to address packaging. The very last thing I just wanted to put out there, if you hadn't heard, yes, we're working on Sustainable Winegrowing Australia, but the wine industry is not alone here. The other ag sectors are doing very similar things. They've got the same focuses on them to demonstrate sustainability credentials. And we've been working with a number of those, and we've been going through a benchmarking activity under the Australian Agricultural Sustainability Framework. So we've been one of the pilot programs that's gone through that benchmarking exercise. It was a really good exercise for us to go through because it's highlighted the areas where we do need to evolve and make some improvements in the program, and that will continue to happen over the next few years. As much as anything, so that we are as good as we can be with regards to the Australian Agricultural Sustainability Framework, but to make sure we are meeting those market demands that are out there that Rachel and Anna both talked about earlier. The other one is that we are part of the Sustainable Wine Roundtable, which is an international collective looking at creating a benchmark standard for lots of different wine sustainability programs that are out there around the world. Everything I've said today, you might have questions about it. The first place to look for any of the answers to your questions is on the website. There's a huge list of frequently asked questions, and I'd strongly encourage you to go there because I'm sure you'll find the answer. If you don't find the answer, please feel free to get in touch with us at the AWRI, at the help desk. There's a number of people who are on the phones responding to your emails. It's a really busy time right now with the membership renewal, but please be persistent. And if you can't get us on the phone, do send us an email because we're checking those regularly. And I just want to say thanks to the team there who are looking after the help desk. My final acknowledgements, and I guess this is on behalf of all of us really representing Sustainable Winegrowing Australia today. We're not doing this on our own, and we've got a long history behind us. And if you want to read about some of the things that were done in the past that have led us to arrive at this position today, please have a look at our history on the website. The members, without you, we wouldn't have a program at all. the regions, I acknowledged you earlier, we really want to continue with all the support we're getting from you, the members of the Australian Grape and Wine Sustainability Advisory Committee, Freshcare, the team at the AWRI and the teams at Australian Grape and Wine, and also Wine Australia, and thanks for your partnership. So thank you very much, and happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Marty. Wonderful. And I will invite Anna Hooper to come back on for the Q&A session. Thank you, Anna. So we've got a few questions that have come through already. So one question from Sarah: massive challenge in making products that are holistically sustainable, e.g. glass bottles, have more emissions, but plastic is more likely to end up in the environment and not infinitely recyclable. How are the right choices being made? So she's interested in your thoughts on this huge topic here.
Anna, do you want to have a go at that one?
For me. Yeah, it's a good, really good question, and I don't know if anyone really has the answer, but I think with anything to do with sustainability, there's always trade-offs, and it's the challenge. And at the moment, emissions is such a high priority when it comes to our sustainability targets as a nation and as a sector, that really has to be a big consideration that comes into play. And at the moment, glass packaging, you know, we know that glass is a significant portion of the emissions embodied in a bottle of wine. And not only that, but it's heavy to transport. So that adds another double whammy to the emissions profile of wine bottled in bottles. And I think there's probably always going to be a place for bottled wine in bottles, particularly at the higher end. I do question why we haven't seen a quicker uptake of low weight packaging at the lower end, noting that most bag and box and PET claim that they can be 100% or near close to 100% recyclable, depending on the exact materials used. But whether that means that they are recycled is a different story. And even with glass, we know it's 100% recyclable, but it's not necessarily 100% recycled. So I think at the moment, we need to really tackle the issue with emissions, and we need to move away from glass, in my opinion. And yes, there's trade-offs, but over time we'll see better alternate packaging solutions as well that are more recyclable and more likely to be recycled.
Thank you. So Marty, if I can ask you a question that's building on this topic. So you talked about a new section related specifically to packaging. So who are we working on to develop that section, and what sort of criteria is expected to be in there for people to be meeting the sustainability credentials for packaging?
That is a very good question, Robin. I probably can't give you much detail about it at the moment because we've really only just been given the directive to go ahead and actually pursue that. But I'm working with Australian Grape and Wine, so Anna and Damien, and I'm expecting we'll be bringing in the different committees that they work with already on packaging. So we'll be consulting fairly broadly around what's out there now, what are the existing reporting that people may be doing around packaging, and incorporating that in. But further than that, I probably can't tell you much more detail.
Okay, thank you. So what would your estimate be for the amount of time needed to fill in the workbook? So this is a question for you, Marty, for a vineyard/winery each year. And is it filled in as a one-off, or is it done throughout the season as you do, you know, extra sprays?
Okay.
One, Marty.
So the first, well, I answered the second part first. You only need to do the reporting once a year. So you do go in there during July and August. So that's the time where you do put it in. You don't have to do it all in one sitting. If it's easier for you to come in, put some data in, go away, come back and put more in, you can do that. But just know that you've got until the 31st of August when it all does need to be complete. Regarding the time, look, some people can go through it in half an hour so that's half an hour a year that they take with that reporting. Other people take longer, and I've heard of people taking maybe 2 hours to do it, but that's usually the first time they do it. The first time will always take the longest, just because it's, you're getting familiar with the system and the types of information that you're reporting, and even getting familiar with the content that's in the workbook. There is a bit of reading to do, especially if you're going through the workbook, and that's probably the area that takes the most time. So it really varies from person to person. The first time you do it will take the longest. Every year after that, it'll get much, much quicker. So don't be overwhelmed the first time. If you need any help, please get in contact with us and we can help you with it.
So just on that, Marty, to get in touch with you for assistance, is the best way to go through the help desk email address. So helpdesk@awri.com.au.
Yes, definitely, that's the best way.
Great, thank you. So Marlies Becker from the AWRI, thank you to all three presenters. So a question for Anna. The changing global regulatory environment is such a massive driver for our industry, how our industry is going to change over the next few years. So she heard you mention that certain trade regulations will be changing by 2024. Is this one of the key target dates that Wine Australia and Australian Grape and Wine are targeting for having the majority of Australian wine sector implementing changes in their business practices? So a long question.
We have various target dates. I see it more as an incremental improvement in terms of getting people to report and make improvements. At this stage, in terms of the only official target dates that we have is for net zero emissions by 2035. In terms of reporting, the 2024 date related to predictions by the finance sector as to when the climate-related financial disclosures might become mandatory for public companies to report in order to, to be listed. And so, yes, I think that's definitely something for consideration for large corporate businesses. And in terms of some of the other policy issues that are happening in the EU, it's a little bit of a watching brief as to what it will mean for wine. As I said, some of the policies are being implemented there, whether or not they try to level the playing field by creating penalties for Australian businesses that aren't at the same standard is not yet announced, apart from the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which at this stage has not been extended to ag products, but they have said that in 2026 they'll be reviewing the scope of that policy.
Okay, thank you, Anna. So Andrew Thomas has a question probably for Marty. Is there much focus on water usage in the vineyard and winery? And how might a small wine business measure this? So flow meters maybe. And is this something that might be compulsory for audit?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, for your question. There's definitely a focus on water usage in both vineyards and wineries. So as a member, you do need to report how much water you're using each year. So that would be one of that primary data sets that you're reporting. When it comes to the audit process, you will need to be able to demonstrate that you are using water efficiently and that you are monitoring water flow. So a flow meter, yes, might be a really good way of doing that. It's not the good thing about the standard, it's not super prescriptive. It's more around, you being able to demonstrate that you know how much water you're using and that you've got strategies in place for continuous improvement of that. So I'd encourage you not to think so much about the audit at this stage if you're not already part of that program and not already reporting the data. Just think about your business. What would make sense for you as a business? Do you need to know exact numbers of how much water you're using? If that would be beneficial for you, then yes, maybe you'd be looking at flow meters down the track.
Great, thank you. And James Lindner, great question. Is there consideration for a conversation around sustainability with grape prices, as economic sustainability is also an important part of grape growing families? So Marty.
I thought that was probably more of an Anna question.
Oh, well, Anna, go for it.
Yes, I think it's definitely worth a conversation about sustainable grape pricing. If you look at grape pricing over the last 10 years or more, it's very closely reflected, except for in odd years of, say, a drought where supply has been right down. It's been really, really closely tied to the export pricing that we've seen, and therefore it's difficult to control grape pricing when it's really controlled by the market. So it really is an issue for the market to resolve. And I think some of the problems with the wine grape sector has been big barriers to exit. And I think, in my opinion, and the jury's not out, but the oversupply situation has really persisted for quite some time. And China, the rapid growth in sales to China probably evened it up for a little while, but obviously that's a luxury that we don't have that big market anymore. So I don't see a return to supply demand being balanced happening in the very near future. Sorry for being a pessimist. But in terms of sustainable grape pricing, I think one of the answers for grape producers is to focus more on differentiating their product. And I see sustainability certification of vineyards as a tremendous opportunity to demand more for grapes. I know we're not seeing wineries pay more for grapes that are certified, but I think it would be nice to think that was actually something that was valued, and if there's increasing demand for certified grapes, and there should also be a small margin on grapes that have got a sustainability certification.
Thank you.
I might just add, there are a lot of people feeling like they need to do this to sell their grapes, and it has become a contractual obligation for some people. And, that's being driven by the market, and the market's demanding large wine companies to demonstrate those credentials, and they need to, pass them down the value chain. That's the reality for some people. I think, though, the other way to think about it is focus on, well, you may not be able to negotiate a better grape price if you've got sustainability credentials. What people tell us on the ground is that going through this program and starting to track your data, for some people it's for the first time, it does help them identify areas where they can improve. And especially when you get those benchmarking reports each year, they're the only place you can get reports like that, where you can measure your performance compared to anyone else in Australia who's also reporting. These are, for some people, the first time they've ever seen, information about how much water they're using compared to anyone else in their region, or how much energy they're using. And they really are good thought starters about where you can make improvements in your business, not just for environmental reporting, but often you can save money. If you can see where you're using more energy than someone else, if you can cut back on your electricity or your tractor driving and your fuel use, you'll save more money. So think about it in the savings, perhaps. The other thing we hear people say time and time again is going through this process has enabled them to sit back and have another look at their business, see where there's an opportunity where they can get a bit more creative and think more innovatively about different ways of doing things. And by doing that, they've also managed to save money. So I'd encourage you to think about it a little bit differently from where I sit.
Robin, can I just add as well? I was just thinking about it. I think the other huge opportunity for us really improving our practices, and I think members of our board and our Australian Grape and Wine members, from what we've heard, have seen the times when Australia used to be right out in front when it came to innovation. And there's no reason why we can't do that again with sustainability. And if we can become better and we can build our reputation as being the most sustainable wine growing nation in the world, I mean, it's a big vision, but if we could do that, export prices will go up. There'll be greater demand for our wines for all sorts of reasons, not just because it's valued more by the market, but because, we've got less issues with, potential trade penalties for not being sustainable. So I see sustainable grape pricing. I know it's hard to be green when you're in the red, but when you're not in the black, whatever the saying is. But I think, if we aim high and we seek that vision of seeing Australia as being one of the greenest wine producers, then that's going to have a flow-on effect for everyone's benefit.
And I totally agree with Anna. And if you are one of those people who is thinking a bit innovatively about what you're doing in the vineyard or winery, get in touch with us, because we would love to talk to you about those things that you're doing, and talk, because you know, we're talking to so many people on the ground at the moment about what they're doing in their vineyards and wineries. There may be someone else working towards the same thing, so we can connect you with them as well. And if there's technical support that we can give you, you know, just to ask us about it.
Great, thank you. Just a question on the large companies requiring membership, their growers are members of the program, and that's really related to the retailers putting pressure on them to prove their sustainability credentials. So are the EU retailers requiring that participants are certified members of a program or just members of a program at this stage?
That is probably a question for Rachel.
Sure.
The only thing I can probably add to it is we know that, well, speaking specifically, you know, about a couple of them, they do recognise Sustainable Winegrowing Australia and they recognise the trust mark. And for some of them, they're just looking for the trust mark, which is really certification. So what I would expect is that they'll be looking for certification. But that's not to say, you know, you've got to start somewhere. So just start as a member and see how you get on and work towards it over time.
Okay, thank you. So James, thanks you for the conversation about grape prices. And an anonymous attendee said, if everyone in the world goes green, it's not differentiation. I guess, do you want to be differentiated by not being green though? If everyone else is going green.
But also you're not either green or you're not green. And I think I see that as saying if everyone starts producing quality, it won't be a point of differentiation. There's always better quality and there's always room for improvement. And I think pressure will mount more and more to be greener. And what was green in 2020, where are we, 2022, might not be considered green in 2025 or 2030. So there's always room for improvement, and you can always, you know, it is a point of differentiation if you're leading the way.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Anna and Marty and Rachel, who had to leave. It was a really interesting session. I'm particularly interested in learning more about the EU's trade deal with New Zealand and their chapter on Indigenous trade as well, and how they are planning to support Indigenous producers. Yeah, it's really exciting. It'd be nice to see the same in Australia. So thank you to the presenters, but also thank you to the audience, everyone who has sent through a question. It's always really appreciated when we get lots of interaction with the viewers. We also have a webinar coming up next week that is a follow-on from the series that we've been doing on hail recovery. So we will have Chris Rogers talking, and a couple of other producers as well, talking about their experiences from the hail from last season. So jump on the AWRI website and register for that if you are interested. And as I mentioned at the start, this webinar has been recorded, and an email will be sent to you with the recording. But thank you everyone for joining us today. See you next week.